Now let's talk a little bit about top stitching inside of Marvelous Designer. This is a great feature for both artists who want to work on the model outside of Marvelous, meaning that after the garments are done, they can bring it into ZBrush or some other application. And as well as those artists, this feature is amazing for look dev artists because it creates the stitching, which is very customizable and can be quickly used for presentation purposes. So there are a couple of ways in which the stitching can be applied to the garment. The first one is called segment top stitch, and it works on the segments, and it's very simple. We simply click on the segment and the stitching is applied. As you can see, there's now a pink line on the segment, and there's the stitching itself. The second way to do that, the second way to apply stitching is to use the freeform top stitch, and this works just like sewing, with the segment sewing and freeform sewing. So we simply click on the segment somewhere, and then we drag it, and then we click, and this is how the stitching is applied. Now there are a few other things to know about creating stitches. So the first one would be if let's say we have a free segment top stitch. What we can do is we can use the rectangle selection feature as if we were selecting the garment, or we're selecting the points, and if we drag it and let go, the whole segment now has the top stitch. So we can apply this the stitching to any kind of selection that we want, or on everything if we select the whole character, the whole set of garments that we have in our scene. Another way of applying stitching on the whole garment is to go into the freeform stitching and simply double clicking on the segment somewhere. So this is how it can be easily and quickly applied to a specific garment. And the last option is to go into sewing. So we need to go into edit sewing. Then we need to select the segment that we want the stitches to be on, and simply right click on one of those seams that we have, and then here we select add seam line top stitch. Now if we go into edit stitching, we'll see that, well, first of all, that we have the stitches, and it's not just on this edge, but it's also on the corresponding edge as well, as you can see. But the color also changes. It's not just this pale pink compared to this one, let's say, but it's very vibrant, very rich kind of pink. So it just indicates that the way these stitches were created was slightly different, and there's actually some limitations when it comes to creating stitching using the seams. To remove a top stitch, we can either select it manually and simply press delete on our keyboard, or right click the top stitch and select delete. But if we have a bunch of top stitches and we're not in the mood of selecting all of them individually and then pressing delete, we can select either segment top stitch or free top stitch, and on the segment that we want those stitches to be gone, we simply click somewhere on a segment, right click it, and then there's option to delete all top stitches. The thing about this option is that it doesn't delete those stitches that were created using the seam lines, because as I mentioned, those stitches are quite well, they're slightly different, and this option doesn't allow us to delete them. So we need to select them and then press delete on the keyboard to remove them. When using free top stitch, there's also an option to be extra precise about the length of the stitches. The way it works is just like with most of the tools in Marvelous. It involves the right click. So to begin, we simply left click somewhere on the segment, and as we go along, we right click, and then we have this this new window where we can choose the length that we want for the stitch. We can also customize top stitches, and this works just like with the seam lines. If we go into Edit Top Stitch and locate one of the top stitches that we have, we can either select the beginning or the end, and it doesn't really matter which one is which. And if we click and hold, and if we drag, we can change the length of those top stitches. And again, as we click and drag, we can right click, and in here we can choose just how much we want to trim or how much the total length we want it to be. Also, we can drag the whole stitch altogether. So this works just like with the seam lines in Marvelous Designer. When we let go, the stitch is applied to this location. Now, as I mentioned, the stitches that were created from the seam lines behave in a slightly different way. So what I meant by that is that if we click and drag the beginning or the end, doesn't matter which one is which, we can do this kind of modifications just like with the normal top stitch. But if we want to drag this somewhere, we can't really do this. And the reason for that is quite straightforward, because we've created the stitch from the seam line, so the program remembers that this particular segment is where the stitch is, so those 2 points are going to be the limitation for the stitch, so we can't get out of this segment, so to speak. Now let's talk about the properties of top stitches. Just like with fabric, buttons and buttonholes, we have the option to add as many top stitches as we want, and we have the option to customize them in a very broad way. So the first option is the offset, and this will determine the distance between the edge and the place where the top stitch is going to be put. So if we change this to 1, the top stitch gets closer to the edge, so there's just 1 millimeter of distance between them. Then we have the shape, and we have a few things to choose from. So there's good variety in here when it comes to the way the stitches are going to look. Then we have the length. So the length is going to define the length of the thread itself. The space is going to define the space between the threads. And the thread thickness will define the thickness. So this is very simple and basic business. Then we have the option for custom MBJ, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later. Then we have the material presets, and this is just like with the fabrics and other things. So it's we discussed this in another video. Then we have the configuration, and this is going to define where the stitches are placed on the garment. We can see that the stitches are lying on top of the garment, which is usually what we want. If this is not the case, if we want it to be the stitch to go inside of the garment, if you want this kind of effect, then we simply need to go into the property editor, and in the configuration we need to choose back. So in this case, the stitch will be transformed to the other side of the garment, and we won't see it in the 3D view, but the problem with this is that we also don't see it in the 2D view, which is a little bit strange, I would say, because even though we have the indication of the pink line that the stitches are there, but it still, I think, wouldn't hurt if there was the indication of the texture itself. Then we have the option to have the stitches on both of the sides of the garment. Then we have the number of lines, and we can choose up to 5. So if we choose, let's say, 2, we can see that now we have the 2 rows of thread. And if we select something that is higher than 1, we can also change the distance. And this is going to be from here, from the menu, is going to be in inches, or we can choose it manually in millimeters and choose something like that. So this is a very nice feature if we're making jeans or some other clothing that has this kind of effect of the stitches. Then we have the last option in here, which is called 3D. And 3D doesn't really do anything with the stitches, because the stitches themselves are 3D objects. This is not texture, this is not a plane, this is actually a piece of geometry that has all the properties that a piece of geometry has inside of Marvelous. And this can be also exported into another program, which is very handy. What 3D does, it creates an effect underneath the stitches themselves. As you can see, there's a faint line in here, which is like a dent underneath the stitching. If we go in here, and now we have a little bit more options to play with, we can change the intensity to, let's say, 50. So now this dent, this line underneath the stitching is a little bit more visible. And we can also use our own normal map for this kind of effect. We can have just some kind of dots to match the insertion of the individual threads, but the default one works pretty well, and the thickness will define the thickness of this line. So quite a few things to play around with. Very good for look deaf artists, because this kind of effect will not translate into another program. This is something that happens only inside of Marvelous Designer. This is purely for presentation's sake.
If you enjoy this content or find it useful, please consider supporting me by buying me a cup of coffee via the link in the description.
We also have some tools when we click on the top stitch itself, and in here we can choose the stitching that we want. Right now we have only one of them, so that's why we can choose only one. If we want another one, get the option to choose from those two. Then we have the start and the end, and this is useful for things like this, when there's some kind of weird effect happening when we create stitching. So if sometimes when we untick those boxes, this effect disappears and becomes a little bit better, but we also have this kind of effect where the stitching is just it's kind of cut in half in this case. And the same applies for end. If we untick that, I don't even know which one is the end and which one is the start here, but I think you understand the idea. This is basically to minimize any weird things that might be happening with the stitching when the border is next to it. And it doesn't work perfect all the time, but it does a decent job most of the time. Then we have the corner option, and there's a box for curved or not curved. And something to be aware of is that depending on how we created the seams, whether we used the segment top stitch or free top stitch, this will determine the look and the way the stitch was created. So for example, in this case, I was using free top stitch, and I clicked somewhere randomly here, and then I finished the stitch here. And as you can see, there's there's a continuous line where the stitch is applied. But in this case, I've used a different technique. I've used the segment top stitch, and I clicked the segment first, and then I clicked the segment after that, and as you can see now the stitching is applied on top of each other. So this is situation based. Sometimes this effect is good, sometimes we don't really want this effect, and if we have this kind of effect, this is where curved corner comes in. If we tick that, we can see now that there's some curvature in the corner, and we can change this curvature by setting a custom number in the length. The last option we have is called right angled, and this works for internal corners. And the way to explain this is we need to have something that was created inside of a garment. So I'll go into free top stitch. I'll double click here to create the stitch itself. And if we look closer, we have this kind of shape where the stitches trying to mimic the cut, the angle of the cut on the garment itself. And this might be a good thing. This might be the exactly effect you were looking for, but if not, we simply go in here and tick this option, right angled. And as you can see now, there's a little bit, I would say a little bit more accurate look of the stitching. This is something that this is how top stitch would look in real life, most likely. So this is just a nice little option again for adding this extra bit of realism to our garments and the way we present our garments and our clothing. Lastly, when it comes to properties, we can right click on the stitch itself and choose a few options that we have here. Delete is very simple. Then we have the select with all the same property, which is quite useful if we have different kinds of stitching on our model and we want to select just the ones that we want to modify somehow. So this is very useful and handy. And then we have this assign to new top stitch, and if we press this works just like with the garments. If we right click and choose apply new fabric, what it does, it in the object browser it creates a new top stitch, and it immediately applies to the selected segment. And the last option that we have here is add internal line on top stitch. If we press that, an internal line is going to be created where the top stitch is lying, and this is quite handy if we want to add some effect where the stitch is connected to the garment. And what I mean by that is that if we now go into and click the internal line, we have the option to change the fold angle. We can change the fold strength. So for example, if we set it to 360, we get a little bit of a dent in here, and unlike the this 3D effect that we were talking about earlier, this effect that we just did using the internal line, this will be preserved if we were to export this into another program. So this is quite nice, I would say, but as you can also see, it messes up the stitching a little bit, so be cautious with this. But another way to use this is that we can select this internal line and we can apply elastic, for example, and this will be a cool look to indicate that there was some kind of clumping, I guess, of the garments, the way it was sewn together, and then there's the stitch line on top of that. So it's just a very handy way of adding those effects to the garments to make them look as realistic as possible without leaving the top stitching tools. Now I would like to mention a few things at the end of this video. The first one is the custom obj option that I mentioned at the beginning. And this is something that I'm a little bit disappointed, because this is what the effect looks like when we use custom obj. As you can see, this is a piece of geometry. This is a little spike I created in 3ds Max, but because everything when it comes to stitching is a geometry, it's a piece of geometry, it looks like the program is trying to optimize this so it doesn't create a million and million of polygons, which is a little bit disappointing, because I wanted to be able to import some kind of custom shape that I wanted, and instead of using this tool, the top stitching as the tool itself, it could have been used as a way to create interesting patterns on the garments themselves. So imagine having some kind of lines in here, and then applying stitching on those lines and customizing them with those kind of spikes. And I've tried a few things in 3ds Max. I've tried optimizing those spikes, the geometry itself, and the lowest I could go was probably 20 polygons, and it still produces this kind of effect. So it didn't really matter if this was 500 polygons like it is right now, or it was 20. The program tries to optimize it in its own way. And the very last thing to talk about is the missing options that I have in my Marvelous Designer. I don't really know why this is. I'm using Marvelous Designer 9, and I've checked the documentation, and it says that I should have those options, but they're not here. And options I'm talking about is, well, number one is that I don't have the ability to create more than just one top stitch when I select it in the object browser. This is not something that I require as such, but I know for a fact that there was this option. There was a plus sign in here, and if the sign was clicked, there would be just those numbers appearing here, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And what it allowed to do is to create this overlocking stitching. So it means that instead of just one let's say zigzag stitch, there would be also a standard stitch going right through it, which is something that happens in physical world when those kind of stitches are created, and for some reason I'm missing this option. So if you have it, it should be there, and it should be basically everything that we see here, just a way to customize the top stitch itself. And the second thing that I'm missing in my Marvelous, or in this version of Marvelous, if I select the top stitch that was created on the internal line, not on the segment but on the internal line, I don't have the position option. Meaning that let's say if I create a top stitch on this shape, on the segment, the stitch is created on the left side of the edge, and if I wanted to create it on the right side, there's absolutely no way for me to do that. And again, this is something that I know exists. This is in the documentation. The option is called flip, and it does exactly what I wanted to do. So it just flips the location of the top stitch, but somehow in my version I don't have this option. But if you do have it, and you're a lucky one, because sometimes I really want to be able to control where my stitches are, and right now I can't do this. So something to be aware of. I hope this is just my case, and you have the version that has everything in it. But if not, hopefully this is going to be fixed in the next version of Marvelous.